Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Friday practice is done in Austria. McLaren top the day. Mercedes not far away. Max Verstappen in the mix and potentially in a new team next season. The rumours are right back on the agenda. George Russell talked about it last night, effectively implying his contract extension or lack thereof is more than likely because Toto's having conversations with Max. And Toto today confirms exactly the same thing. It seems to be becoming increasingly clear Max would very much like to leave, or at least considering to a great degree leaving Red Bull Racing. Whether Toto will open the door and allow him to join Mercedes, that is a very different conversation, but one that is increasingly gathering steam in recent weeks. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's crack right on with things because a lot happened today, such as this. Talking to Max Verstappen and Jean-Pierre Lambiase, of course, his race engineer, not going to be there at Austria this weekend due to what they describe as private, personal reasons. He'll be back in Silverstone, it seems. Simon Rennie, who's this man, he'll be taking his place for the weekend, so maybe not the ideal approach for Max again on the weekends. Will it affect his performance? Relatively doubtful, but we know that radio communications with your engineer can be quite critical, as I think we've found out recently with Hamilton's multiple arguments with his man Riccardo Adami. Maybe they're making things work for Ferrari, but as of today, it doesn't really seem that's the case at all. These are the upgrades the teams are bringing this weekend. McLaren have a couple of changes on their car too. Ferrari, we've talked about their floor upgrades, their diffuser upgrades over the last couple of days. Seem to be working a treat today. We'll get into that in a second. Red Bull have brought one change and we'll see it and actually where it's potentially been adapted from. Couple of things for Mercedes, couple of things for Racing Bulls, couple of things for Sauber. But on the whole, there's some rather substantial changes this weekend. Red Bull have a modified floor. Now this is only for Max's car. Yuki doesn't have it yet. So it's pretty clear the approach that Red Bull are taking, and totally understandably so. Further updates due in Silverstone, of course, in next round. And apparently this piece of the car from Red Bull's side has been inspired by Maranello. So as Jaquessa says, I know that it seems strange to most. However, it should not be a surprise. At least aerodynamically, the SF25 is a fine car. So it seems like the modifications to the floor that Red Bull have made were actually SF25 inspired by what Ferrari are doing. It's just their problem seems to be very much mechanical. Rear suspension we've talked about. And that's the issue that Ferrari will have to dissect certainly after today, is to look at everything and say, okay, yes, we brought this new floor, a new diffuser to the Ferrari. Is it really any better than it previously was? Not necessarily, as it seems at the moment. Maybe they will need the further rear suspension upgrade that's going to put the package all together. But it's a big couple of rounds for Ferrari, right? Because if you think about the way that things have gone for them in recent weeks, it's been a real disaster, and Fred Vasseurs' job is under serious pressure, and if they don't start to turn this season around and fast, he's going to lose his job. The team's going to fall even into more chaos. That is what it seems like to me, at least from the outside looking in. So Ferrari needs to improve things and fast, and according to Fred Vasseur, one of the reasons why they brought the upgrade earlier to Austria rather than to Silverstone was because let's do the talking on the track. So yeah, well, we'll see about that tomorrow, I guess. At the end of the day, Friday is practice after all, but it was far again from a clean day for Ferrari. Gearbox issues, power issues, impeding investigations, radios not working. Like, it was all over the place again for the Scuderia. And as AMUS reported, Fred Vasseur was like, okay, let's make this upgrade fast-tracked. Let's put it on the car earlier. Maybe it doesn't do the complete job they're hoping that it will do when we arrive to Silverstone and they bring some more upgrades on the car, but at least it might do something. There's not really been all that much evidence of that so far. Hamilton nor Leclerc particularly happy with things today. But Dr. Obbs, as well as talking about the Red Bull upgrade and the small floor change that Mercedes or Red Bull are hoping will improve their performance, and Mercedes are hoping does not, there is talk again about Max Verstappen and where he may well go next. Dr. Obbs, he's got connections at Red Bull. I'm sure that he's talked to a few people. He says just my feelings, but he does say, I believe the pendulum is moving towards Max leaving. I believe Mercedes could be a real possibility. IMO, if he stays, it's because the Mercedes option didn't work out. And I think my feeling for some time has been relatively similar. I think if Max could choose where he drives next year, he would not be choosing Red Bull Racing. You might argue it's a risk to leave Red Bull, but I actually think the risk in many respects, if you could simply choose where to go, would be to stay. There's not history of Red Bull, certainly in the 2026 era, with the brand new regulations on the engine side, the partnership with Ford. I think Max probably knows, as I think we probably know, that Red Bull are not going to be winning the title next year. It's kind of why it feels that Red Bull are putting their all into this season for Max, because I think they are probably in the recognition that they're going to be serious underdogs for next year's championship. Even if they make an aerodynamically good car, they've no longer got Newey going into the first year as they did in 2022, and there's no at all guarantee that their engine's going to be competitive. As we know, they've been very vocal, Max and even Horner, about not particularly liking these engine rules and wanting some changes. That's not happened, largely because Toto Wolff and Mercedes and the Mercedes-powered teams have said, I don't know what you're talking about, we're not changing these rules, we're perfectly happy with our engine for 2026, which tells you probably a lot of what you need to know. So that's the Max Verstappen piece. I think he would be wise to consider departing Red Bull Racing. The team has been on not like an absolute downward spiral, complete disaster, but it's not been great in the last 12, 18 months. And I think it's pretty clear that Max should be considering his options. And as I say, if the grid was completely wiped clean, you know, Max would go to McLaren or to Mercedes or whatever, right? He would choose a team that looks like they have a stronger car than Red Bull. But obviously it doesn't really work like that. He can't just waltz into McLaren, you wouldn't think anyway, given the way that things are presently over there. But maybe he could walk into Mercedes. But of course that depends on the way that things are with the George Russell conversation. I think we know full well that Antonelli is not going anywhere. I don't know if Antonelli's necessarily exceeded expectations, because my expectations were very high, but he's been fast. He stuck it on pole once back in Miami, and he scored a podium last time out in Canada, and today his long run pace was really impressive. So, you know, Antonelli I think will continue to grow and to learn, and there's a reason why Mercedes have backed this kid and given him all the testing time in the world. He's not going anywhere. The real question is whether George Russell is your team leader, but someone who, you know, feels like he's pretty much at the peak of his powers right now. Russell's driving very, very well. We know that mentally he's strong, he's resilient, he can win under pressure, right? And he certainly will put other drivers under pressure, even if himself, you know, he might not be the fastest driver on the planet. That's more than likely Max Verstappen. So it's a big debate, really. And in my head over the last couple of weeks, my conclusion has gone towards Mercedes electing to keep George Russell, and I still think they should do that. Although I did talk with Cameron a lot last night. We had a little chat on his channel, Cameron CC. If you guys haven't seen his work, go and check it out. But we talked last night on a live stream. You guys can watch after this if you'd like. And, you know, he's of the opinion that if Max Verstappen is available, not only should you get him, but Toto Wolff would want to, because he missed out back in the day when he had Hamilton, Rosberg, and couldn't give Verstappen the seat. Red Bull gave him the opportunity, and I totally understand that. My opinion is that there's some risk that is involved with signing Max in terms of some of the external factors. It may be risk which is simply worth taking, but you guys know my opinion that I think Russell is better than people give him credit for, just because he's not maybe the most likable driver on the grid, and he's more disliked than he is liked, and I think as a result people tend to underrate his abilities to some degree. Is he Max Verstappen though? No. But I think there's a question on how much of an upgrade that is. Some people will tell you that it's a mega upgrade and you should sign Max basically at any cost. Others will say it's not so clear cut. I'm not sure where my opinion is on that. I think that Mercedes as an outfit would be wise to consider the value of their current partnership and relationship they have, but also I think it would be amiss to not at least consider the services of Max Verstappen if he is available. I think that's where they presently are. It's been my feeling in recent weeks that Russell probably will get the extension, and I still will back that opinion, but it is interesting if Max is making it increasingly clear that he's not happy with things. And the reason why I had this quote up on screen before was when he said this: if you look at the standings now, winning his 5th title is not very realistic. I am very honest about that. It definitely feels like Verstappen's quotes over the last couple of weeks are leaning the direction of not being particularly keen to stay at Red Bull. And as I say, if he could choose, I think he would leave, but the option might not be there. Now, George Russell says a lot of this stuff with a smile, because I think he is very, very confident, George, in his own abilities, in the way that he's executing right now, and is pretty much saying to Toto, look, yeah, Max might be great, but look what I'm doing. I'm maximising the car in the same way. Whether he is or not, that's another question, but I do rate Antonelli highly, and Russell has effectively destroyed Antonelli this season. I know that it's only Kimi's first year, but Russell's still done a great job, I think, given the teammates that he has. And as Russell says, Mercedes, they want to be back on top, and if you're going to be back on top, you need to make sure you've got the best drivers. It's only normal the conversations with the likes of Verstappen are ongoing. So he basically just puts it out there and says, yeah, Toto's talking to Max. And then Toto says the same thing. I want to have those conversations behind closed doors, not in town halls, but it doesn't change anything of what I said before about George or about Kimi, about the lineup that I'm extremely happy to have. And Toto also mentioned, interestingly enough, because people were like, could it be Max and George, hypothetically? We've also driven here with Rosberg and Hamilton. After that, everything is easy. So, look, a Verstappen-Russell partnership would certainly not be easy, but and I don't think that Mercedes would be wise to do it, but it's at least something that could be kind of exciting to consider. I've also made the point before that next year we don't really know where things are going to be. I also think for Max, there is some debate on whether you want to join a team now. 2027 might be a logical time. I mean, who knows? Maybe Ferrari come out the gate and they're absolutely steaming in 2026. Hamilton wins the 8th and retires. Then there's a seat available. That's not going to happen, let's be real. But you never know. There's a chance, right? There's a chance that it happens. And maybe if you're Max, do you want to take a gamble on getting the team right in 2026, or do you say, maybe I'll stay at Red Bull for a year, even take a sabbatical for a year, that was thrown around, and then come back in 2027 and simply join the best team? That's maybe an option as well to consider for Max, but as Toto says, it's logical that you look and explore what could happen in the future. I'm very happy with my lineup, but, we haven't given him a car to win the World Championship for the last 3 years. That's on us. The times the car's been good, he's been winning races, and people will say, George has won, 4 races, Max has won 4 titles, it's different, and look, there are levels to this game, sure, but equally it's not like George has had the car, and I'd be fascinated to see what George could do in a machine that was actually capable, and maybe we're going to start to see that with Mercedes from now to the end of the year. Toto also talked about it to the media and basically said that, yeah, we're having some conversations. He said it's absolutely likelier, as he says, that George will be in the car more so than Max. That's what he said anyway, that it's absolutely more likely that George stays, which I also agree with. But, at the end of the day, Toto would be unwise not to play the game a little bit when it comes to Max, especially if there is a little bit of, being able to destabilize Red Bull to some extent in the process. But I think it's fascinating to see that this whole thing is still going. I thought maybe, not exactly after what happened in Canada, but I felt like the stories might calm down a little bit to the extent of, okay, yeah, George is probably get the new deal, we're going to sign it at some point. But Mercedes have pushed that can, kick the can down the road, and they don't need to rush to sign it. Russell's going nowhere else, right? Russell has no other better options than where he currently is, so the ball is totally in Mercedes' court. They have all the power in these negotiations right now, and they can effectively choose when they want to get Russell to sit down and put pen to paper, or whether they don't want to do that at all. So there's all sorts of fascinating things coming up on the horizon here, but Russell is, interestingly enough, usually the one to say it. He will usually say, yeah, Toto's talking about Max, but I'm confident that I'm good enough to fend him off. And I think that it's also wise for Russell to say those things, because if Russell does eventually get the extension, that, makes him sound really good, right? Because it makes it sound like Toto's chosen him over Max, which maybe he has, maybe he will, maybe he won't, who knows? Or maybe the Max conversations were never that serious and Russell was always going to get the extension anyway, but it sounds good if Russell gasses up this idea that Max might join the team, because whatever Russell says is not going to affect Toto's decision, but it will affect, let's say, community perception when a decision is made. So this is pretty much what Toto says. George is doing a great job. Nothing on that front needs to change. And I've not been flirting with Max. I've purely been having conversations. So yes, that's the situation at Mercedes, and it is all rather fascinating. But let's talk practice, because this was pretty fascinating as well. The first practice session, the headlines, yes, George was P1, but the headlines went to this man, Alex Dunne. And I feel a touch vindicated because I did like a 5-minute segment on Alex Dunne the other day and saying why he was kind of an interesting driver to keep an eye on, and I think he delivered today in FP1. So he stepped into the McLaren. Exciting to see, of course, drivers step into a car that is currently the best car on the grid, went 4th place, was on the fastest, like on the high-speed corners, was the quickest man of anyone, about a 10th up on Piastri in those corners, and stuck at P4, less than 700 away from Piastri's best time. Now, it's pretty rare that you see rookies in their first free practice session in a Formula 1 car go really even close to their teammate, let alone the World Championship leader, let alone in the fastest car, and being very, very close indeed to the fastest time of the entire session. So this was particularly compelling, right? Now, Alex Dunne is quick, and it's difficult to exactly extract what the takeaway from this should be. There's a few things you can say. Option 1, Norris is terrible, right? Dunne's close to Piastri already. Option 2, Piastri is terrible. Like, the guy's a fraud, a rookie's, come this close to him in his first session. Well, like, both of those things are not, like, necessarily justifiable. I think what is true is that Dunne is a fast driver, and what it means for Lando and Oscar is definitely unclear, to say the very least. But of course, people are going to have their opinions on what that means about those couple of drivers. I think my conclusion is the car is very compliant, and it is also very fast. I think it's as good as Dunne may be, and may prove to be, and may continue to be in the future. I think it's nigh on impossible. Like, if Dunne stepped into the Red Bull, for example, even if the Red Bull on its day is just as quick as the McLaren, and maybe it is, maybe it's not, it's the max factor, whatever you want to say, that Red Bull is clearly a handful to drive, and it sounds almost impossible to see anyone in the world who could step into that Red Bull and immediately be close-ish to Max. It's just not going to happen. Whereas clearly in the McLaren, it is at least possible. So I think it says something about the car that they've designed, that it's very fast, but also it seems very drivable, that Dunne was able to hop in and do a great job with it basically immediately. So I think those are some of the takeaways here from the Alex Dunne excellent performance in the first free practice session. He didn't top the session, of course. That ended up being George Russell with a 105.5. Maybe not the most representative session ever, but yeah, Dino Beganovic was in the other Ferrari, and Charles Leclerc's Ferrari. He was about 3/10 of Hamilton, but it wasn't like Hamilton's Ferrari was quick in that session. It was kind of all over the place, and they had so many issues, Ferrari, again, gearbox issues, power issues, all sorts of stuff. The long run data from that first session looked like this. We'll have a look at the data that F1 Dan puts out in a second on the second practice session, because probably a little bit more relevant there. But Russell was on the softs, Verstappen and Piastri on the mediums. We're talking pretty much 109.9s, 110 flats, something like that, but it was definitely faster in the afternoon. Again, Ferrari, all their talk about, yep, this is the weekend, guys, this is the one we turn it around. Leclerc says, I can't hear you at all, even the radio is having issues. The second practice session gets underway, and Hamilton's like, mate, I got no pace, this car is just straight up slow, and he wasn't really much of a factor when it comes to the long running either. Now, Russell's fastest lap here was good, and it was actually on a very old set of soft tyres, so the delta between Russell and the front runners, the McLarens, is probably not so representative. But I thought the 2 laps the McLarens did were pretty compelling. Piastri went, I think at the time he was purple with a 104.7-ish basically, and then Lando a few seconds behind him then went purple as well. So we know that this is a great track for Lando, but this is not, what we're seeing here on this timesheet is not especially unusual. We've seen it plenty of times this season where Lando is quicker than Piastri in practice, in Q1, Q2, and then it falls apart in Q3. But look, we've seen glimpses from Lando, such as back in Monaco, and I think this weekend he really needs a good one, right? I mean, the car's clearly on it. They clearly have the best car this weekend, or very close to. Norris has been excellent around here historically. He needs to capitalise on what looks like an impressive performance in FP2, and in the long run data, we see similar kind of discrepancies. This was Max going third. I don't know why this screenshot I grabbed here didn't have any of the timesheets, but, he ended up 3/10 away, which wasn't terrible, and Yuki's lap was a bit messy, but it wasn't bad either, given that he doesn't have the upgrade. So, and Leclerc's pace was decent as well. Stroll was even right in the mix, and Russell, as I say, 6/10 down, but that's not really representative of where that Mercedes, I think, is. They were looking competitive around here, as we have seen before, and actually, in terms of long run pace, after 17 laps on the mediums, Antonelli was the fastest man out there. He was averaging a 109.3, or at least that was the current pace, at the time. Piastri was on a 109.4, Norris at a 109.6, Russell at a 109.6 as well, and then this was some other numbers here. So Lando, after 22 laps, he was still at a 109.3. Now today was much cooler. There was even a bit of rain in the air earlier compared to what it's going to be like on Sunday, so expect the degradation to be more severe, but it does feel like those tyres are lasting, and Max was in the mix, Leclerc was in the mix as well, so Leclerc's lap times are pretty strong on the Ferrari, but again it feels like the one lap pace, as was the case before this upgrade, is still a bit of a weakness. But these were the overall numbers after all the laps that the guys put in here. Antonelli 109.7, that was right there with the two McLarens. Max didn't do as long of a stint really, so it was difficult to read into that. Leclerc and Hamilton's times also weren't bad really, 109.7s, 109.8s, they were kind of in the mix as well. Russell was a bit slower, so maybe there was some setup stuff there that they can think about going into Saturday. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.